The dust from the mine entrance hung thick in the afternoon air when Owen Preston first saw her stumble into the sunlight, and something in his chest twisted hard enough to make him forget about the telegram he had come to deliver. The woman was little more than bones draped in torn canvas pants and a filthy shirt that might have been blue once, her blonde hair matted against her skull, her pale skin streaked with coal dust and what looked like dried blood. She swayed on her feet as if the weight of standing upright was almost too much to bear, and when she lifted her face to the sun her eyes were hollow, haunted things that made Owen's hands curl into fists without conscious thought. He had been working as a ranch hand and occasional courier in Salida, Colorado since the spring of 1883, and in his 26 years he had seen plenty of hard living. The mining camps in these mountains were brutal, unforgiving places where men worked themselves to death chasing silver and gold through endless dark tunnels. But this was different. This was a woman, alone from what he could see, emerging from the Blackstone mine looking like she had been chewed up by the earth itself, and spit back out with barely enough life left in her to keep breathing. Owen dismounted from his horse in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the rocky ground hard. The mine owner, Thomas Garrett, stood near the entrance with two of his foremen, counting bills with the same cold calculation Owen had seen gamblers use in saloons. Garrett was a thick-necked man with expensive clothes and cheap eyes, the kind who measured everything in terms of what it could earn him. Owen had delivered messages to him before and never liked the experience. The woman took 3 more steps and her knees buckled. Owen was moving before he thought about it, crossing the distance between them fast enough to catch her before she hit the ground. She weighed next to nothing in his arms, and up close he could see the deep bruises on her wrists, the cuts on her hands that had healed badly, the way her collarbone jutted out sharp enough to be painful to look at. Her eyes fluttered open and focused on him with effort. They were green, he noticed, the color of new grass after rain. "I finished my contract," she whispered, her voice rough as gravel. "Tell him I finished it." "I have got you," Owen said, surprised by how gentle his own voice came out. "You are going to be all right." "Preston," Garrett called from behind him, his tone annoyed. "Put her down and come here. I need that telegram delivered to Denver by tomorrow." Owen carefully set the woman on her feet, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. She gripped his shirt with fingers that trembled, trying to stay upright. He could feel the heat of fever radiating from her skin through the fabric. "What is your name?" he asked her quietly. "Clara Sutton," she managed. "Please, I just need to get my wages and I can leave." Something about the desperate hope in her voice made Owen's jaw tighten. He looked at Garrett, who had gone back to counting his money as if a half-dead woman standing 20 feet away was of no more interest than a broken wagon wheel. "Wait here," Owen told Clara, though he made sure she was leaning against a support beam before he let go of her. He walked over to Garrett with deliberate steps, aware that the 2 foremen were watching him with the lazy attention of men who were used to violence and did not particularly mind it. "Mr. Garrett," Owen said, keeping his voice level, "that woman needs a doctor." Garrett did not look up from his bills. "She needs to get off my property. Her contract is done." "What kind of contract puts a woman down in a mine shaft looking like that?" Now Garrett did look up, his eyes flat and uninterested. "The kind she signed herself. Clara Sutton came here 6 months ago desperate for work after her father died and left her with nothing but debts. I gave her a job crushing ore and sorting rock. She was fed, she was housed, and now her obligation is fulfilled. What she does next is not my concern." "You worked her half to death," Owen said, and there was an edge in his voice now that made one of the foremen straighten up. "She has got fever and she can barely stand." Then she should have been stronger. Garrett folded the bills and tucked them into his vest pocket. This is a mining operation, not a charity for weak women who do not know their place. Now are you going to take that telegram to Denver, or do I need to find someone else? Owen felt heat rising in his chest, the kind of anger that usually got him into trouble. He had spent most of his life trying to be a decent man in a world that did not always reward decency, but there were limits to what he could stomach. This was one of them. "You are going to pay her what you owe her," Owen said quietly. "And you are going to do it now." Garrett's expression hardened. "I already paid her, gave her the money this morning before her shift ended. What she does with it is her business." Owen turned to look at Clara, who was still leaning against the beam with her eyes closed. "Miss Sutton," he called, "did he pay you?" She opened her eyes with visible effort. "Said I owed for food and lodging," she said, her words slurring slightly. "Said it came to more than my wages. Said I should be grateful he did not charge me interest." Owen turned back to Garrett so fast the man actually took a step backward. "You worked her for 6 months and she is leaving with nothing." "She is leaving with her life, which is more than plenty of miners get," Garrett snapped. "Now get off my land, Preston, before I have my men throw you off." The two foremen moved forward, hands dropping to the clubs they carried on their belts. Owen did not move. He was not a particularly large man, but he was lean and hard from years of ranch work, and there was something in his face that made people think twice. More than that, he was genuinely angry in a way that made his vision narrow down to just Garrett's smug expression. "I am not leaving without her," Owen said, "and she is not leaving without fair pay." "Then you are both trespassing," Garrett said. He nodded to the foreman. "Remove them." The first foreman reached for Owen's shoulder. Owen caught the man's wrist, twisted it in a way his father had taught him years ago during their time driving cattle, and used the man's momentum to send him stumbling into his companion. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. Owen did not wait for them to get up. He strode over to Garrett, grabbed the front of the man's expensive vest, and pulled him close enough to see the sudden fear in those cold eyes. "How much do you owe her?" Owen demanded. "I do not owe her anything," Garrett hissed, but his voice had lost its certainty. "How much?" $50, but she ate twice that in food and the housing cost." Owen released Garrett's vest only to reach into the man's pocket and pull out the folded bills. Garrett sputtered and grabbed for them, but Owen shoved him back hard enough to make him sit down in the dust. Owen counted out $50, folded them carefully, and tossed the rest back at Garrett. "Consider us even," Owen said. Behind him, the foremen were getting to their feet, murder in their eyes. Owen did not care. He walked back to Clara, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and something else he could not quite read. "Can you ride?" he asked her. "I think so," she whispered. "Good enough." Owen scooped her up again, ignoring the shout from Garrett behind him. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Rusty, stood where he had left him, trained well enough not to spook its sudden movements. Owen lifted Clara into the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. "Stop them!" Garrett was yelling, but Owen was already turning Rusty toward town, clicking his tongue to send the horse into a quick trot. Clara sagged back against his chest, and he could feel every ridge of her ribs through the thin shirt. The anger in his chest was still burning, but underneath it was something else, something unfamiliar and intense that he did not have a name for yet. "Where are we going?" Clara asked faintly. "Dr. Matthews," Owen said. "He owes me a favor. Then we are getting you somewhere you can rest." "I do not have money for a doctor." Owen looked down at the top of her matted hair, at the vulnerable curve of her neck where it met her shoulder. "You have got $50, he reminded her, "but you are not spending it on the doctor. I will handle that." "Why are you helping me?" The question was barely audible, but Owen heard the confusion in it, the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust kindness. He did not have a good answer for that. He barely knew himself why he had just risked a beating or worse for a woman whose name he had only learned 5 minutes ago. All he knew was that the sight of her stumbling out of that mine had hit him somewhere deep and primal, and the thought of riding away and leaving her to Garrett's mercy had been physically impossible. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally, though even as the words left his mouth he knew they were not quite the whole truth. Salida in late September was a town caught between its mining boom ambitions and its frontier reality. The main street was a mix of false-fronted buildings and canvas-top structures, with the Arkansas River running fast and cold just beyond the southern edge of town. Owen guided Rusty past the saloons and supply stores to a small house near the edge of town, where Dr. Matthews kept his practice. The doctor was a weathered man in his 50s who had seen enough mining injuries and fevers to be unshockable, but even he raised his eyebrows when Owen carried Clara through the door. "What happened to her?" Matthews asked, already moving to clear his examination table. 6 months in the Blackstone mine," Owen said grimly, laying Clara down as gently as he could. Now that they were in better light, he could see how bad she really looked. Her skin had a grayish tinge under the dirt, her lips were cracked and bleeding, and there were infected sores on her arms that made his stomach turn. Matthews examined her with practiced efficiency, his expression growing darker as he worked. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally making small sounds of pain when the doctor touched something tender. Owen stood against the wall with his arms crossed, watching and feeling completely useless. After what felt like an hour, Matthews straightened up and came over to Owen. "She has got fever from infection, malnutrition, dehydration, and what looks like the early stages of black lung from coal dust," the doctor said quietly. "If you had found her a week later, she would probably be dead." The words hit Owen like a physical blow. "But she is going to be all right now. If we can get the infections under control and build her strength back up, yes." Matthews wiped his hands on a cloth, his expression troubled. "I have heard rumors about how Garrett runs that mine. Never thought he would be desperate or cruel enough to put a woman down there. He said she signed a contract. Probably did. Plenty of people sign terrible contracts when they are desperate enough." Matthews glanced back at Clara's still form. "She is going to need care for at least a few weeks, somewhere clean and quiet where she can rest and eat regular meals." "You got a place for her." Owen had not thought that far ahead. He lived in a bunkhouse at the Chambers Ranch with 6 other hands, which was absolutely not appropriate. The boarding house in town was run by Mrs. Fletcher, who was respectable but charged rates Clara could not afford for weeks of care. "I will figure something out," Owen said. Matthews gave him a long look. "You know this girl?" "No. Saw her coming out of the mine today looking like death. Could not just leave her there." "Most men would have." Matthews clapped him on the shoulder. "You are either very noble or very foolish, Preston. Possibly both. I will keep her here tonight, get some fluids and medicine in her. You come back tomorrow with a plan." Owen nodded, though his mind was already racing through possibilities. He looked at Clara one more time, at her face that was probably beautiful under all the dirt and exhaustion, and felt that strange tightness in his chest again. "Take good care of her, Doc. Always do." Owen left $50 on the table, which made Matthews start to protest. But Owen just shook his head and walked out before the doctor could argue. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been breathtaking if Owen had been in any mood to appreciate them. Instead, he mounted Rusty and rode toward the Chambers Ranch, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. He found Mrs. Chambers in the ranch house kitchen, working on the account books by lamplight. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who had been running the ranch with her husband for nearly 15 years. Owen had always respected her practical intelligence and her fairness. "Mrs. Chambers," he said, pulling off his hat as he entered, "I need to ask you something." She looked up from the books, one eyebrow raised. "You have that look on your face like you are about to complicate my life, Owen Preston." Despite everything, Owen felt a faint smile tug at his lips. "Maybe a little. There is a woman in town who needs a place to stay and recover for a few weeks. She has been sick and she has got no family here. I was wondering if maybe she could stay in the old foreman's cabin. It has been empty since Jenkins retired." "And who is this woman?" "Her name is Clara Sutton. She has been working at the Blackstone mine for 6 months under contract. Garrett worked her almost to death and tried to send her off with nothing. I got her to the doctor, but she needs somewhere to heal." Mrs. Chambers set down her pencil and gave Owen her full attention. "You are bringing home strays now. I could not leave her there. Most men would have. That is what Doc Matthews said." Mrs. Chambers studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there made her expression soften slightly. "The cabin is yours to use as you see fit. But Owen, you understand that people are going to talk if you are living 50 yards from an unmarried woman with no chaperone." "Then they can talk. My reputation can handle it, and hers cannot get much worse after 6 months in a mine." "Fair point." Mrs. Chambers went back to her books. "Bring her here tomorrow. I will have my daughters help clean up the cabin and make it livable. And Owen, you did a good thing today, even if it was reckless." "Thank you, madam." Owen left the house feeling like at least one problem was solved. He spent a restless night in the bunkhouse, ignoring the questions from the other hands about where he had been and why he looked like he had been in a fight. His knuckles were bruised from when he had grabbed Garrett's vest, and there was a scrape on his arm from one of the foremen, but otherwise he was fine. Physically, anyway. Mentally, he could not stop thinking about Clara's hollow eyes and the way she had felt like fragile bird bones in his arms. The next morning, Owen rode into town before dawn and waited outside the doctor's office until Matthews emerged. "She is awake," the doctor said. "Fever has broken somewhat. She is asking for you." Owen felt something warm unfold in his chest at those words. He followed Matthews inside and found Clara sitting up on the examination table, looking marginally better than she had yesterday. Someone had washed her face and hands, and her hair had been tied back, revealing delicate features that had been hidden under all the grime. She was still far too thin and pale, but there was life in her eyes now, awareness and intelligence that had been dimmed by exhaustion before. "Mr. Preston," she said, her voice still rough but stronger. "Dr. Matthews told me what you did, confronting Garrett, paying for my treatment. I do not know how to thank you." Owen shifted his weight, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No thanks needed. Any decent person would have done the same. But they did not." She looked down at her hands, which were bandaged now. "I worked alongside men in that mine for 6 months. They saw what was happening. None of them said a word. Then they were not decent people." Owen took a step closer. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a horse and then put back together wrong," she admitted with a faint smile that transformed her face entirely. "But better than yesterday." "Good. Because I've got a place for you to stay while you recover. The Chambers Ranch has an empty cabin. It is yours for as long as you need it." Clara's eyes widened. "I cannot accept that. You have already done too much." "You can and you will," Owen said firmly. "Dr. Matthews says you need weeks of rest and good food. You are not going to get that anywhere else in Salida that you can afford. But what will people think?" I do not particularly care what people think. Do you? She looked at him for a long moment, and Owen had the sudden sense that she was taking his measure, trying to figure out what kind of man he was and what he wanted from her. He met her gaze steadily, letting her look. Finally, Clara nodded. All right. But I am going to pay you back every cent once I am well enough to work again. We can argue about that later, Owen said, though privately he had no intention of taking her money. Doc, can she travel to the ranch? If you go slow and keep her warm, I will send along medicine and instructions. Matthews began gathering supplies into a bag. Miss Sutton, you are a lucky woman. Whatever guardian angel sent Owen Preston past that mine yesterday was looking out for you. Clara's eyes found Owen's again, and there was something in her expression that made his heart beat faster. Yes, she said softly. I am beginning to think I am. The ride to the Chambers Ranch took the better part of an hour, with Owen keeping Rusty at a careful walk and Clara sitting in front of him wrapped in a borrowed coat. She did not talk much, but Owen could feel the tension in her body gradually ease as they left town behind and rode into the open country. The September air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains and cold water from the river. It was the kind of day that made a person grateful to be alive, and Owen hoped Clara could feel that despite everything she had been through. The ranch sprawled across a wide valley with the mountains rising dramatic and snow capped in the distance. The main house was a solid two-story structure built from local timber, surrounded by barns, corrals, and outbuildings. The foreman's cabin sat a little ways apart, nestled against a stand of aspen trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold. Mrs. Chambers and her two daughters were waiting outside the cabin when Owen rode up. The girls, 15-year-old Margaret and 13-year-old Lily, stared at Clara with undisguised curiosity as Owen helped her down from the horse. Miss Sutton, Mrs. Chambers said, coming forward with a practiced smile that was warm without being overly familiar. Welcome to Chambers Ranch. Owen has told me about your situation. We are glad to help. You are very kind, Clara said, and Owen could hear the exhaustion creeping back into her voice. The ride had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. Let us get you inside and settled, Mrs. Chambers said briskly. Girls, bring the baskets. The cabin was small but clean, with a single room that held a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. Someone had swept the floors, put fresh linens on the bed, and stocked the shelves with basic supplies. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, which Owen suspected was Lily's touch. Clara looked around the space with an expression that was equal parts relief and disbelief. This is too much, she whispered. Nonsense, Mrs. Chambers said. You rest now. Margaret will bring you lunch in a few hours, and I will check on you this evening. Owen, make sure she drinks the tea the doctor sent before you leave. The Chambers women left in a rustle of skirts and whispered conversation, leaving Owen alone with Clara. He busied himself with starting a fire in the stove and preparing the medicinal tea, aware of her eyes following his movements. You are very comfortable in a kitchen, Clara observed, settling carefully onto the bed. You learn to take care of yourself when you are riding the range, Owen said. He brought her the cup of tea, which smelled strongly of herbs and something bitter. Doc says this will help with the infection. Clara took the cup and sipped it, making a face. Tastes like dirt mixed with old shoes. Owen laughed, surprised by her humor despite everything. Probably means it is working. She drank the rest of the tea with visible determination, then set the cup aside and looked up at him. Mr. Preston, I need to understand something. What do you want from me? The question was direct and tinged with wariness that made Owen's heart ache. He understood what she was really asking, what her experience must have taught her about men who offered help to desperate women. "Nothing," he said, and meant it completely. "I want nothing from you except for you to get well. That is all. Men do not do something for nothing. Then I guess I am not like most men." Owen pulled one of the chairs over and sat down so they were at eye level. "Miss Sutton, I am not going to lie and say I do not find you compelling, because I do. But you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is some man putting pressure on you for anything. You stay here, you heal, and when you are ready to figure out what comes next, we will talk about that. Until then, there are no expectations and no debts." "Understood." Clara studied his face for a long moment, and slowly the wariness in her eyes began to fade. "Why did you help me?" "Because when I saw you coming out of that mine, you looked like the bravest person I had ever seen," Owen said honestly. "Still standing after 6 months of what must have been torture, still breathing. That took strength most people do not have. I could not let Garrett take that away from you." Her eyes filled with tears, which she tried to blink back. "I thought I was going to die in that mine. Every day I thought it would be my last, and then I would wake up the next morning and have to go down into the dark again. You do not have to go into the dark anymore." The tears spilled over then, and Clara covered her face with her hands. Owen stayed where he was, giving her space to cry, understanding that she needed to release the fear and pain she had been holding inside. After a few minutes, she lowered her hands and wiped at her cheeks, looking embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said. "Do not be. You have earned the right to cry." She gave him a watery smile. "You are a strange man, Owen Preston, so I have been told." He stood up, recognizing that she needed rest more than conversation. "I will be in the bunkhouse if you need anything. Margaret will bring you food and Mrs. Chambers will check on you. You sleep as much as you want." "Owen," she called as he reached the door. He turned back. "Thank you for everything." "You are welcome, Clara." Over the next few weeks, Owen watched Clara slowly come back to life. At first, she slept 16 hours a day, her body finally able to recover from months of brutal labor and inadequate rest. Mrs. Chambers and her daughters brought her regular meals, which Clara ate with the desperation of someone who had known real hunger. The infections cleared up under Dr. Matthews' treatment. The bruises faded to yellow and then disappeared entirely, and color began returning to her pale cheeks. Owen visited the cabin every evening after his work was done, usually bringing something small, a book from the ranch house library, wildflowers he had spotted while riding fence lines, a particularly interesting rock he had found by the river. At first, Clara seemed unsure how to respond to these offerings, as if she had forgotten that people could be kind without wanting something in return. But gradually she began to relax around him, to smile more easily, to share pieces of her story. She had grown up in Illinois, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Her childhood had been comfortable if not wealthy, filled with books and music and the ordinary pleasures of a small town. Then her mother had died of pneumonia when Clara was 16, and her father had never quite recovered. He had started drinking, lost his teaching position, and accumulated debts that Clara had not known about until after his death 2 years later. "I tried to keep our house by taking in sewing," Clara said one evening as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. She was wearing a dress that Margaret had lent her, and she looked almost healthy now, her cheeks round and her eyes bright. "But the debts were too large and the wages too small. I sold everything we owned, but it still was not enough. The bank took the house. I had nowhere to go and no skills except needlework. So you came west," Owen said. "I heard there were opportunities in the mining towns. I thought maybe I could find work as a seamstress or a laundress." She laughed bitterly. "I was so naive. Garrett found me in Denver, newly arrived and desperate. He said he had worked for a woman with a good, strong back. Said it was hard work but honest, and it would clear my father's remaining debts if I signed a contract for 6 months. I signed without reading carefully. I did not realize he meant putting me down in the mine itself until the first day. Owen felt the familiar anger rise in his chest. You should be able to take him to court for that. With what money? What lawyer? Clara shook her head. It does not matter now. I survived thanks to you. That is what is important. What will you do now? Owen asked, even though part of him dreaded the answer. The thought of Clara leaving, of going somewhere he could not see her or know she was safe, made his chest feel tight. I do not know, she admitted. I have been thinking about it. I have got my $50 and a little more saved from before I met Garrett. Maybe I could go to Denver, try the seamstress work again. Or you could stay in Salida. She looked at him, and there was something soft in her expression that made Owen's heart race. Why would I stay in Salida? Because I am here, Owen wanted to say. Because the thought of you leaving makes me feel like someone is pulling my insides out. Because over these weeks I have come to care about you in a way I have never cared about anyone. But he did not say any of that. Instead, he said, because Mrs. Chambers mentioned she could use someone with sewing skills. The ranch hands are always tearing their clothes, and none of us are worth a damn with a needle. And Margaret is learning to sew and could use a teacher. It would not be much money at first, but it would be honest work. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Is that the only reason you want me to stay? No, Owen admitted, his voice rough. It is not. What is the other reason? He looked at her, at the way the sunset light caught in her hair and turned it to gold, at the delicate line of her jaw and the curve of her lips. Because I have never met anyone like you. Because you are brave and strong and you make me laugh. Because when I am with you, I feel like maybe I am becoming a better man than I was before. Owen, she said softly, and there was wonder in her voice. I know the timing is terrible, he continued. I know you just got free of one terrible situation, and the last thing you probably want is some cowboy telling you he has feelings for you. But I cannot help it, Clara. I have been half in love with you since the moment I saw you standing in that mine entrance, refusing to fall down even though everything in your body was telling you to quit. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. You are wrong about one thing, she said. What is that? The timing is not terrible, it is perfect. She smiled at him, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds. I have been falling in love with you too, Owen Preston. How could I not? You saved my life, you gave me back my dignity. You have been patient and kind, and you have never asked me for anything except to get well. Owen felt something fierce and bright unfold in his chest. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you properly. Bring you flowers and take you on buggy rides and get to know every single thing about you. I want your permission to hold your hand and maybe, eventually, kiss you. I want to prove to you that not all men are like Garrett, that some of us know how to cherish something precious when we find it. You already proved that, Clara said, but her eyes were shining. But yes, I would very much like to be courted by you, Owen Preston. I would like all of those things. So Owen courted her. He borrowed Mrs. Chambers' buggy and took Clara into town for church on Sundays, ignoring the stares and whispers from people who recognized her from her time at the mine. He brought her wildflowers every evening, until the cabin was full of jars stuffed with columbine and Indian paintbrush and mountain aster. He taught her to ride on one of the gentler ranch horses, and she taught him to appreciate poetry, reading to him from the books he had borrowed while they sat outside the cabin in the cool autumn evenings. Clara started working for the ranch, mending clothes and teaching Margaret to sew, and proved to be as skilled with a needle as she had claimed. Mrs. Chambers paid her fairly, and Clara began to build up savings again, though she insisted on giving Owen back the $50 he had taken from Garrett. Owen tried to refuse, but Clara was stubborn, and eventually he accepted the money and immediately used it to buy her a warm winter coat, which made her laugh and call him impossible. They talked about everything during those autumn weeks. Clara told him about her childhood in Illinois, about the books she loved, and the dreams she had once had of seeing the ocean. Owen told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 20, about the years he had spent drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place that felt like home. Until now, he did not say out loud, but Clara seemed to understand anyway. One evening in late October, as the first snow was beginning to fall, Owen finally kissed her. They were standing outside the cabin, watching the fat white flakes drift down through the twilight, and Clara had turned to say something to him about how beautiful it was. But the words died on her lips when she saw the way he was looking at her, and instead she stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. "Owen," she whispered, and it was permission and invitation all at once. He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how delicate she felt, how precious. "I love you," he said, needing her to know before he kissed her. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Clara said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened," Owen said gently. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be frightened again." And then he kissed her, soft and sweet and reverent, tasting the joy on her lips and feeling her hands curl into his shirt to pull him closer. The snow fell around them like a blessing, and Owen thought that he had never been happier than he was in that exact moment, with Clara in his arms and the whole future stretching out before them like an unwritten story. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara was smiling up at him with such radiance that it made his breath catch. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Owen said, "I am going to ask you to marry me." Her eyes widened. "Now, right now?" "Well, not this exact second. I should probably get a ring first and ask you somewhere more romantic than outside a cabin in the snow." He grinned. "But soon, very soon, because I know you are the woman I want to spend my life with and I see no point in waiting." "I would say yes," Clara said, "just so you know. When you ask, whenever you ask, my answer will be yes. Even though I am just a ranch hand with barely $50 to my name, especially because you are that kind of man, the kind who risks everything for a stranger, the kind who brings wildflowers every day and keeps his promises." She stood on her toes to kiss him again, quick and sweet, the kind I could not imagine living without. Owen did wait another 2 weeks, until he had saved up enough to buy a simple gold band from the jeweler in Salida. He asked Clara to marry him on a Sunday afternoon, taking her up into the foothills on horseback, to a spot he had found that looked out over the whole valley. The mountains rose around them in shades of white and gray, and the Arkansas River wound silver through the brown grass far below. "Clara Sutton," Owen said, taking her hand and going down on one knee in the rocky soil, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Clara said immediately, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Owen slipped the ring on her finger, and she pulled him to his feet so she could kiss him properly, her arms wrapping around his neck and her body pressed close against his. They stayed up there until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming out loud about their future together. They were married in the small church in Salida on a cold day in November, with Mrs. Chambers and her family in attendance along with most of the ranch hands and what seemed like half the town. Dr. Matthews gave Clara away, and the circuit preacher conducted the ceremony with genuine warmth. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Owen had bought her, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes, and Owen wore his best clothes and felt like the luckiest man alive. The Chambers gave them the cabin as a wedding present, along with a raise in Owen's wages that would allow them to start saving for their own place eventually. Clara continued her sewing work, and Owen continued his ranch work, and they built a life together that was simple but rich in all the ways that mattered. Their first winter was hard, with snowdrifts that sometimes came up to the cabin windows and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the basin froze solid. But they kept each other warm, and Clara learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove, and Owen learned that coming home to his wife was the best part of every day. They talked for hours in the evenings, played cards by lamplight, made love slowly and sweetly under piles of quilts, and fell more deeply in love with each passing week. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new beginnings. Clara discovered she was pregnant in April, and Owen thought his heart might burst from joy when she told him. He became absurdly protective, insisting she rest more and let him take over more of the household chores. Clara bore his fussing with good-natured patience, though she drew the line when he tried to forbid her from riding. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I am still going to live my life, Owen Preston. You are just going to have to trust that I know my own limits." "I do trust you," Owen said. "I just worry. I know. But I survived 6 months in a mine. I think I can handle growing a baby." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Our baby is going to be fine. I am going to be fine. We are going to be a family." Their son was born in December of 1884, during a blizzard that nearly prevented Dr. Matthews from reaching the cabin. But the doctor made it through the snow in time, and after 12 hours of labor that turned Owen into a nervous wreck, Clara delivered a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and a surprising amount of dark hair. "What should we call him?" Clara asked, exhausted but glowing as she cradled their son against her chest. Owen, who had been so terrified during the birth that he had prayed to every deity he could think of, looked down at his wife and child and felt overwhelmed by love. "What about James, after your father?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "He would have loved that, James Preston." She smiled through her tears. "It is perfect. James was an easy baby, which Owen considered a blessing since he had no idea what he was doing as a father." But Clara was patient and competent, and between her guidance and the advice of Mrs. Chambers, Owen learned how to change nappies and mix formula and walk the floor at midnight when James would not settle. He discovered that he loved being a father, loved watching his son grow and change, loved the way Clara looked when she nursed the baby with that soft, distant smile on her face. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Owen was promoted to foreman of the Chambers Ranch in 1886, which came with better pay and more responsibility. He and Clara started saving in earnest for their own land. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Clara got pregnant again in 1887 and delivered a daughter they named Rose, who was as quiet as her brother had been loud. In 1889, after 6 years of saving and planning, Owen and Clara finally bought their own land, 160 acres along the Arkansas River with good grazing, and a small house that needed work but had solid bones. The day they moved in, Owen carried Clara over the threshold while she laughed and protested that she was too heavy with their third child, and James and Rose ran through the empty rooms shouting with excitement. "We did it! Clara said that night as they stood on their porch watching the sunset. "We actually did it." Owen pulled her close, his hand resting on the swell of her pregnant belly. "You had doubts, sometimes." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "When I remember where I was 6 years ago, what my life looked like, it seems impossible that I could have all of this now. A husband I love, beautiful children, a home of our own. Sometimes I am afraid I am going to wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Owen said firmly. "It is real. You are real. This life we have built is real." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You survived something that should have broken you, Clara. You came through that darkness, and you were brave enough to let yourself love again, to trust again. Everything we have now is because of your strength as much as anything I did." "We did it together," Clara corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "I could not have done any of this without you, Owen. You gave me back my life that day at the mine. You gave me hope. And you gave me a reason to be the man I always wanted to be," Owen said. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I love you. I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "That is a good thing," Clara said with a smile, "because you are stuck with me forever." Their third child, another son they named Daniel, was born in the fall of 1889. Owen's ranch grew slowly but steadily, and by 1892 they had a decent herd of cattle and were turning a small profit. James started school in Salida, riding to town with his father when Owen had business there. Rose developed a talent for drawing and covered every spare scrap of paper with pictures of horses and flowers. Daniel was a wild, fearless child who gave his parents heart attacks on a regular basis with his climbing and exploring. In 1894, Clara got pregnant again, which surprised them both since they had assumed they were done having children. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and Dr. Matthews, now in his 60s but still practicing, ordered Clara to rest as much as possible. Owen hired a woman from town to help with the housework and cooking, ignoring Clara's protests that it was an unnecessary expense. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Catherine, was born small but healthy in the summer of 1895. Owen was 41 years old by then, and Clara was 36, and sometimes Owen could hardly believe how different his life was from what he had imagined. He had thought he would spend his years drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never finding anything worth staying for. Instead, he had a wife he adored, 4 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a place in the community. All because he had happened to ride past a mine on a September afternoon in 1883 and seen a woman who refused to give up. He told Clara that story on their 15th wedding anniversary as they sat on their porch after the children had gone to bed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come by that day?" he asked. "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but not often. I try not to dwell on the what-ifs. I would rather focus on what is." She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "I got lucky, Owen. Against all odds, I got incredibly lucky. But more than that, I got you, and that has made all the difference." "I am the lucky one," Owen said. "We are both lucky," Clara decided. "Lucky and grateful and very much in love." "Yes," Owen agreed, pulling her close. "Yes, we are." As the years continued to pass, the Preston Ranch became a fixture in the Salida community. Owen was known as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Clara's sewing skills were in constant demand, and she took on apprentices, teaching young women in town the trade. James grew into a serious young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Rose discovered a talent for teaching and talked about becoming a school teacher like her grandfather had been. Daniel remained wild but channeled his energy into breaking horses, showing a natural gift for it. Catherine, the youngest, proved to be the best rider of all of them, fearless and skilled in the saddle. In 1899, when James was 15, he asked his father about the story of how Owen and Clara had met. They were riding fence lines together, checking for damage after a storm, and the question came out of nowhere. "Your mother never talks much about her time before we met," James said. "But I have heard things in town. People saying she worked in a mine, that you confronted the owner. Is that true?" Owen considered his son, seeing Clara's green eyes looking out of a face that was becoming more like his own every day. "It is true," he said finally. "Your mother went through something terrible before I met her, but she survived it, and she made a good life for herself afterward. That is what matters. What did the mine owner do to her?" "He worked her too hard for too long and tried to cheat her out of her wages," Owen said carefully. "I convinced him to pay her what he owed." "How did you convince him?" Owen smiled faintly. "With words and determination and maybe a little bit of force. The important thing is that your mother got free and we found each other." "And you fell in love," James said, a hint of teenage skepticism in his voice. "And we fell in love," Owen confirmed. "Completely and permanently." "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me, James. Meeting her changed everything. It made me want to be a better man, to build something lasting. Every good thing in my life now can be traced back to that afternoon when I saw her coming out of that mine." James was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I am glad you helped her," he said finally. "And I am glad you fell in love, otherwise I would not be here." "No," Owen agreed. "None of us would be here. We would not have this ranch or this family or this life. That is why I never regret what I did that day, even though it was reckless and probably stupid. Some things are worth the risk." That night, Owen told Clara about the conversation. They were in bed, the house quiet around them, and Clara listened with her head on his shoulder. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "The truth. That you went through hell and survived, that I fell in love with you, that everything good in our lives came from that day. Do you really believe that, every word?" Owen turned to look at her in the dim light from the window. Even at 40, Clara was beautiful to him, her face marked by laughter lines in the years but no less precious. "Do you ever regret it, staying here, marrying me, building this life?" "Not for one single second," Clara said firmly. "Owen, you gave me everything. Hope, love, a family, a home. I would not change a thing. Even the hard parts, they made us who we are." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Owen Preston. I have loved you for 16 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left." "That is a long time," Owen said with a smile. "Not long enough," Clara replied. They had 23 more years together after that conversation. Years that saw James take over more and more of the ranch operations as Owen's joints stiffened with age. Years that saw Rose marry a teacher from Denver and move away, though she visited often. Years that saw Daniel start his own horse training business and become one of the best in the state. Years that saw Catherine marry a neighboring rancher and settle on land adjoining theirs. They had grandchildren, a whole gaggle of them, who filled the house with noise and laughter during holidays and summers. Owen taught them to ride and rope, just as he had taught their parents. Clara sewed clothes for them and told them stories and spoiled them shamelessly. Owen and Clara grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their hands growing gnarled but still reaching for each other in the night. Owen died in the winter of 1922, at the age of 69, with Clara holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I love you. Thank you for saying yes." Clara lived another 5 years after that, long enough to see all of her children settled and happy, long enough to hold great-grandchildren in her arms. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1927, in the bed she had shared with Owen for over 40 years, in the house they had built together. At her funeral, James spoke about his parents' love story, about how his father had seen his mother emerging from a mine, thin and exhausted, and had confronted the owner that very day, about how that single act of courage and compassion had changed the course of multiple lives, about how true love was not just romance and passion, but also patience and partnership and the determination to build something lasting together. "My parents were not perfect people," James said to the gathered mourners, "but they loved each other perfectly. They showed all of us what it means to be truly devoted to another person, to choose each other every single day for 44 years. That is their legacy, and that is what we will remember." The Preston Ranch continued to thrive for generations after that, passed down through the family line. But the story of how it began with a thin, exhausted woman emerging from a mine and a cowboy who could not walk away became a family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It became a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we choose compassion over convenience, when we risk something for a stranger, when we have the courage to confront injustice, even when it would be easier to look away. And it became a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to heal wounds, to build futures out of the wreckage of the past. Owen and Clara's love story began in darkness and hardship, but it grew into something beautiful and enduring, something that touched everyone who knew them and echoed long after they were gone. It was a love worth fighting for, worth celebrating, worth remembering. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to the world, proof that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, love could take root and flourish and last forever.